Welcome back to Train Signal. You are watching the video for Lab 2, using Group Policy Object to deploy applications. In this video, you will learn how to use Group Policy Management Tool, which is a new tool in Server 2003. You will learn how to create organizational units and populate them with users. And finally, you will create GPOs to deploy applications to the benandbrady.com domain. So let's get started. Let's first have an in-depth conversation as to what a group policy is and what a GPO is. So here's my next screen. What is a group policy object? Well, group policy is a feature of Active Directory that enables you to manage user and computer configuration from a single central point of administration. This sentence is straight out of Microsoft's literature. So group policy is a great new feature whereby if you want a certain policy on a computer or certain policies to be applied to a user, you do not have to visit each laptop or each user's computer to set up those policies. What you can do is you can use what is known as a group policy object and then deploy those policies in that object. Once a user logs on or once a computer joins the domain, those policies will be applied to the user or that computer respectively. So once again, it's a central way of managing users and groups and giving them different policies. So that was a group policy. A group policy object is simply an Active Directory object, just like a user or an organizational unit is. The only difference is that the group policy object will contain the group policies that you've set up. Just like with any other object, it can be managed within the Active Directory infrastructure. So you decide on the policies that you want, and then you create the policies in the group policy object. Now what do you do with this object? Well, you can assign these objects to different items or different objects in the Active Directory. So the GPOs can be assigned to either sites, which are geographical areas in your Active Directory domains, or you can assign it to the logical domains such as benandbrady.com, or what you can do, and this is the most preferred method, is to create organizational units for each department or for each location and then assign the GPOs to that organizational unit. So in retrospect, you decide what policies you want, then you put those policies in a GPO object, and then you assign the GPO object either to sites, domains, or OUs, depending on who you want that GPO to affect. And finally, there are two default GPOs that is already created once you create a new domain. The first one is called a default domain policy, and the second one is called a default domain controllers policy. We're going to see all this in a moment. As I said, before we actually start application deployment, I'm going to take you to an extensive tour of group policy objects, how to create them, and how to use a new tool known as the Group Policy Management Console. So let's get started with that. So I'm going to minimize this screen and connect to our domain controller 1, which is DC1. I have the connection open over here, so I'm simply going to use it. Let me log in to domain controller 1, and there we are. Now, to begin with, this new tool called the Group Policy Management Console is not installed by default when you install Server 2003. It's a free download from the Microsoft's website. So I've already done that. Here's where the download is. Usually I create a folder called tools and put all the tools that I would need for the activities that we're going to perform in this particular folder. So here's the download. It's called gpmc.msi. You can download this from Microsoft's website. So let's go ahead and install this. Once again, this tool is not available as part of the default installation of Server 2003. You have to download it and then install it. So let's get started with that. It'll take only a few minutes to install this tool. Once this tool is installed, this will be a central feature in managing and creating GPOs. This should take a few moments. And by the time, while this is happening, let's have a look at what this GPMC does. So I'm going to take you to the next screen over here. Group Policy Management Console. It's a simplified user interface. Before, in Server 2000, when you had to create GPOs and manage them, it was not very clear whether you're managing the GPO or the link, and it was pretty confusing as to who will get the effects of this GPO. It was a brand new tool in Server 2000, and now Microsoft has improved upon it by creating a simplified tool known as GPMC. Also, once you use the GPMC tool, you can manage GPOs across all the domains within the forest. In fact, you can also manage GPOs between forests. So all you need to do is install this tool, and you don't have to go from domain controller to domain controller like you did before in Server 2000. You can manage all your GPOs within the forest, in fact across the forest also, using the same central tool known as GPMC. You can also copy, paste, and link GPOs right from there. You also get a better visual view of what a GPO is and what a link is. And I'm going to visit this soon with you. There is a major difference between what a GPO is and where it is linked. You also get good reporting on GPO settings. Eventually, in your domain, you'll have several GPOs, and you would like to know exactly what each of these GPOs is doing, which is also known as the resultant set of policies. One of the later labs in this video, I'm going to show you how to use this RSOP tool. And last but not the least, you finally have a way of backing up and restoring your GPOs, and we will be doing this in a later video. Please remember, GPOs was a new feature in Server 2000. However, you did not have the GPMC management tool for a centralized management of GPOs like we do over here. So let's see all this in action. I'm going to go back over here and then continue the installation of the GPMC tool. I'm simply going to agree on the screen and then finish installing. This should take a few moments. I'll join you as soon as the installation is finished. The GPMC tool just finished installing, so I'm going to close this box now and give you a tour of the Group Policy Management tool. So to begin with, let's go to Start and then go to Admin Tools, and over here we'll find a new program, Group Policy Management. Now let's take a tour of Group Policy Management. Here's how this tool works. I'm going to maximize the screen. This is our forest, benandbrady.com. If you had more than one forest, they would appear right over here underneath each other. Okay, so remember, you can manage different GPOs across different forests using Group Policy Management tool. We have one forest, benandbrady.com. In our forest, we have one domain. If we had several domains, again, they'll be listed one below the other. Our domain is called benandbrady.com. So I'm going to click on that. And then over here, it shows me the objects or the group policy objects within that domain, which I'm going to come to in a moment. Let's expand this. And now I'm seeing the objects within the domain benandbrady.com. So forest, within the forest, you have several domains, and within each domain, you can have different objects. So here are the objects for benandbrady.com. You have the domain controllers object. If you recall, domain controllers object is a container that contains the computer accounts for all the domain controllers. We had created an OU called test, and it is listed right over here. This is an important container, group policy objects. Group policy objects contains all the group policies that you have created for this domain. So every time we create a new group policy, it will be located right over here. By default, there are two policies that are created when you create a new domain. The two policies are the default domain controllers policy and the default domain policy. Let's look at these names and see why they are named as such. I'm going to click on this object called Ben and Brady. Look at the little curvy arrow over here. You may recognize this as a shortcut. This basically shows that this is a GPO link. It is not a GPO, it is a GPO link. Let's once again look at what a GPO object looks like. I'm going to click on the group policy object, and this is a symbol for a GPO. This is a symbol for the GPO link. The little arrow shows you that it is a link. What this is basically saying is that the policy, default domain policy, has been linked to the object benandbrady.com, and hence you see the curvy arrow over here. What about the default domain controllers policy? Well, if I click on the default domain controllers over here and expand it, as you can see, you have the default domain controllers policy linked over here. And if I click on it, actually, it gives me this dialog box basically saying that you have selected a link to a GPO, not the GPO itself. If you do not want to see this message again and again, you can turn it off, but I'll keep it on just so that we are reminded that we're not actually looking at the GPO itself, but you're looking at the link for the GPO. So I'm going to click on this one more time. So to summarize, all the GPOs are created over here, and then you're going to link each GPO to the right object, namely a forest, namely a domain, an OU, or you can also link it to a site. Let's now move on and look at the contents of these policies. So I'm going to expand this group policy object, and let's look at one sample policy, the default domain policy. So there are different tabs over here. The first tab, the scope, shows me where this policy has been linked, and those objects appear over here. Remember, you can link a GPO to a site, domain, or OU. So this GPO, default domain policy, is linked to benandbrady.com, and you can see it visually over here also. Who will this GPO be applied to? It will be applied to all authenticated users under benandbrady.com. Let's go into the details. This basically shows me some statistics as to when it was created, and whether or not the GPO is enabled or not. If you'd like to disable the GPO, all you do is you click on this, and then you say all settings disabled. You can also choose to partially disable a GPO by looking at by disabling computer configuration or user configuration. Now what these objects are, we're going to see in a moment. So I'm going to leave it as enabled and move on to the next tab, which is the settings tab. The settings tab will give me a report. That is pretty quick. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than this. I'm going to close over here. This is simply a security warning in Internet Explorer telling me that you're looking at an unsecured page, which I'm going to accept. You only see these boxes when you're using Server 2003. So I'm going to click close over here, and this is showing me what is contained within this policy, the default domain policy. Please remember, this is a report. I cannot change these objects over here. How do you edit the GPU? I'm going to show you in a moment. But this is a snapshot of what is contained within the GPU. Let's look at some of the salient features over here. For example, this policy is going to remember the last 24 passwords. So a user has to use unique passwords 24 times, and then they can recycle the password if they so desire. The minimum password length is going to be 7 characters, and so forth. So in a snapshot, you can see all the different settings for this GPU. This is a new feature in Server 2003. In Windows Server 2000, you have to actually go to the edit box of the GPU and then look at policies and basically hunt down what is enabled and what is not enabled. The delegation tab shows what user can do what to this GPU. For example, the domain admins can create, edit, modify the security settings of this GPU. So these were the different tabs that tells you as to what is contained within this GPU. Now let's look at how these GPUs are created. To look at the GPU and look at the settings and how to change the settings, you simply right click on the GPU and then click on edit. Once you do that, it will take you to the group policy object editor. You create new policies within the group policy object editor. There are two different portions of the screen, and let's go through each one at a time. The two sections of a group policy object are computer configuration and user configuration. If you create any policy settings in this area under computer configuration, then it will apply to all the computer objects contained within that OU, site, or domain. So any changes that you make over here will be applied to all the computer objects. However, any changes that you make under the user configuration will be applied to the user objects. So let's take some examples. Let me expand Windows settings, and in Windows settings, let me expand security settings. I'm going to just reposition this window so we can have a good look as to what these policies are. Now over here, there are local policies and there is an audit policy. If I make any changes over here, at this point, none of these settings are defined. But if I were to define an audit policy, it will be applied to all the computer objects that are contained in that container. All right, going back, user objects, I'm going to expand under Windows settings. And then here's an example, log on, log off scripts. And we're going to create log on and log off scripts later on. Any script that I create over here will be applied to users when they log on. So you have complete control over your environment. You can choose to apply group policy objects to computers, or you can choose to apply group policy objects to users. And we're going to use examples of both as we go along in these videos. For example, in this video, we'll be deploying Microsoft Office XP application. We can choose to give it to users, or we can choose to give it to each and every computer contained in that organizational unit. And you'll see many examples of that. So I'm going to get out of this for a moment and then take you back over here. Let's take a little tour one more time. To navigate this object, group policy management object, you simply go to the domain. You simply go to your domain object, which is benandbrady.com, and then click on the group policy objects. All your group policy objects are available over here. To link the objects that are linked will appear under the respective containers. So for example, the test OU, if it had any group policy objects linked within it, they would appear over here. As you can see, none of them have been linked. Hence, you see no objects over here. So let's link one so you get an idea as to how to link group policy objects also, and then we'll go on and create our application deployment object. So here we go. Here is our policy, default domain policy. And let's say that I would like to link this policy to the object called test. Here's how I would do it. I'm going to select this, and then over here, go back to the test OU, right click and say link an existing GPO, click on it, and then select the GPO that you would like to link over there. In our example, we're going to link this GPO called a default domain policy, and I'm going to click on the OK button. Now, notice over here, you see a little link called the default domain policy. You just linked the default domain policy to the OU called test. All right, this was just an example to show you. I really don't want to keep it over here, so I'm going to simply delete it. Right click on this and then simply say delete, and you've deleted the link. Notice over here when you delete an object, because I clicked on the link, I'm deleting the link only, not the GPO itself. So the GPO and the link are two distinct objects within the Active Directory. I'm going to click the OK button and it is gone. Okay, so this was a brief tour of the group policy management object. We installed the group policy management object and it took a brief tour as to what you can do with it. Now let's get back to our application deployment scenario. What we're going to do is the following. Let me take you to the Active Directory diagram over here so you can have a look. This is our benandbrady.com domain. What I'm going to do is the following. Create two OUs, organizational units, within benandbrady.com called CA for California and NC for North Carolina. These are the two locations for the benandbrady.com company. So these will be the two OUs. Within CA, I'll create three departments: marketing, accounting, and sales. And within North Carolina as well, there'll be three departments of three OUs, namely marketing, accounting, and sales. And then what we will do is the following. We'll create a group policy object so that the users in these OUs get the application Microsoft Office XP. So let's get started with that scenario. The following are the steps that you need to take to deploy an application. The first step is to create a software deployment point. So let's see what this is. I'm going to go back to our domain controller 1, and this is what I've done so far. On the C drive, I have created a folder called Office XP, and in this folder, I have copied the CD-ROM of Office XP. So all I did was create a folder, copy the contents of the CD-ROM, and the next thing I'm going to do is right click on it and say share to share this folder. We're going to keep the share name as Office XP and then finish this process. So software deployment point is simply a location where the code or the actual application is located. So simply all you do is create a folder, share it, and then copy the application within that folder. So simple enough. That's the first step. The second step you need to do is create the OU structure and then populate it with users. In this manner, we will be applying the GPO or the application to users within those OUs. So let's do that. In order to do this, what we'll do is the following. We're going to create the organizational unit structure as denoted over here. So I'm going to show you how to create a couple of these objects and then finish these objects, and you should do the same if you're following the labs in this video. So let's first create a new object called CA under benandbrady.com. Going back to DC1, I'm going to close the screen, and then to create the organizational unit, we will go to Start, Admin Tools, and then use the program Active Directory Users and Computers. So here we go. To create a new organizational unit in the benandbrady.com domain, you simply click on benandbrady.com, right click, New Organizational Unit, and then it will ask you for the organizational unit name. We're going to create our first organizational unit, namely CA for California. Click on the OK button. In this manner, we'll create our second OU, which is North Carolina, which is also under benandbrady.com. Let's have a look one more time. I just created this one. Now I'm going to create the NC organizational unit. So to do that, you need to right click on benandbrady and then New Organizational Unit. And then this one will be NC for North Carolina. In this manner, let's finish the other OUs. Within California, there were three OUs. So I'm going to click on California, and the OUs are, let's create them quickly over here. Marketing is one. As you can see, this is an object within the California OU, and you can see it visually in that manner. I'm going to right click on California OU one more time and create a newer one called Organizational Unit, Accounting. And our third one will be Sales. Alrighty, so these are our organizational units within California. In a similar manner, you must create the organizational units within North Carolina as well. Let's do that quickly. Organizational unit, and then it's going to be marketing. The second one will be accounting. And the final organizational unit is sales. So we are done with that. Now, within each of these organizational units, I'm going to create some user accounts. As a demonstration, I'll create one user account and then let you finish creating the rest of the user accounts as shown in the lab. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create the first user account and then let you finish creating these user accounts. This table is also in the lab PDF file that is included as part of the CD-ROM. So let's create a first user. What we're going to do is the following. We're going to create a first user in the organizational unit called accounting in California as according to the lab. So under CA, there's an account, there is an OU called accounting, and over here I'm going to create my first user, namely Jill Smith. So let's do that. To create a user over here, you're going to right click, say new, and then user. The first name will be Jill, last name Smith. The logon name is going to be J Smith. Click on the next button. Our password will be capital P ASSWORD 1. Once again, the password is going to be password 1 with a capital P. I'm going to confirm the password. And all this is in the PDF file for the lab. I'm going to uncheck this user must change password in next log on so that you don't have to change the password once we log in as Jill Smith. And I'm going to finish this process. So I've created the first user called Jill Smith. In this manner, I'm going to create the rest of the users over here so that we can get ahead with our application deployment lab. So let's do that. I'm going to go back over here and pause the video a little bit so that I can create these users and then join you once again. Welcome back. I have just finished creating the user accounts for the benandbrady.com domain. Here's a snapshot of it. In a California OU, you have 3 OUs, and in each of these OUs, there is a user account that I've created. The reason why I've created so many user accounts is so that later on when we do different types of group policy objects, these user accounts will let us test those policy objects by logging on as one user and seeing the effects and logging on as a different user and seeing a different kind of an effect. All right, so here is the organizational unit structure and the users contained within it. Let's move on to application deployment. So far, we have created the software deployment point, we have created the OU structure and populated it with users. Now comes the main point, how to create a group policy object to actually deploy Microsoft Office XP. So let's get started with that. I'm going to go back to domain controller. I'm going to close this one. And just as a reminder, in the C drive, we have our object called Office XP, which is a folder that has been shared, and then the contents of the CD is in there. All right, so let's get started. To create a new group policy, we need to use the group policy management tool. So let's start that. Now, if you recall from our previous conversation, to create a new group policy object, you need to click on the group policy objects link, right click, and say new. All right, the name that I'm going to give to this new group policy object will be Office XP, and then click on the OK button over here. This simply created a new group policy object for me, which is blank. There are no settings within this object. To actually modify this group policy object, we need to edit it. In order to do that, you select it, you right click, and then you say edit the GPO. And if you recall, there were 2 different sections, computer configuration, user configuration. This is what we need to do in our environment, namely benandbrady.com domain. What we need to do is the following. We would like to deploy Office XP to all the users in the California OU. And again, we need to deploy Office XP to all the users in the California OU. Now there are 2 options. You can do this using the computer configuration, or you can do this using the user configuration. In the computer configuration, what will happen is all the client objects contained in the California OU will automatically get Office XP. In other words, regardless who the user is, everybody will get Office XP. If that's what you want to do, go ahead and create the settings under computer configuration. On the other hand, if you would like to manage users, which is always a better option, in other words, depending on who logs on, they get the following applications, then you do it under the user configuration. So in our case, what we're going to do is the following. We would like to assign applications to users in the California OU. So we're going to use the user configuration tool. The second thing you need to know is the following. There are 2 ways of actually deploying application. You can use the method known as assign. When you use this method, what will happen is when the user goes to the Start, All Programs menu, the application will already be already available under under the menu over here. That is known as the assign method. The second method is what is known as the publish method. In publish, the user will actually have to go to the control panel, and in control panel they'll have to go to add remove programs and then get the application from there. Obviously the first method, the assign method, is much better, simply because the user doesn't have to go to the control panel and then go and find the application and deploy it. They would see the application right where they expect it, under the programs menu. In order to do that, you need to have what is known as an MSI file. Sorry about that, I'm going to close this. You need to have what is known as an MSI file in the installation program, and Microsoft Office provides that for you. Let's check this out. I'm going to go to the C drive where we create our SDP. Okay, let me minimize this as well, and let's go to the C drive. And in the C drive, you will find that in the Office XP folder, there is a file that Microsoft has given to us called proplus.msi. Each application that Microsoft creates has an MSI file that will help us assign this application to users or to computers. So we're going to use this file to assign Office XP to users. The effect of this will be that when a user logs on, they will find Office XP ready for them under the programs menu. So let's see how this is done. I'm going to go back to our group policy object editor. In order to assign application to users, you need to expand the software settings under the user configuration, select software installation, and then over here right click, say new, and then say package. Now we're going to find the proplus.msi installer under the look-in. This is important, folks. Please do not go to C drive and then navigate to Office XP and then double click on proplus.msi. In fact, when you do that, you should see a message. The reason for this is the following. You're going to apply, or you're going to assign this application to users, and the users will get this application once they log on from their machine. If you assign it by right clicking, saying new and package, and then say look in the C drive, what's going to happen is the group policy object will inform the user to look for Office XP package in their own C drives, which is not true. They need to get Office XP from a central deployment point, namely on DC1. So in order to pick up that MSI file, you need to go through network places. So navigate the network places, double click, keep double clicking until you find the object. So I'm going to go to the benandbrady.com domain, go to DC1, and then here's my share Office XP. In fact, that's exactly why I shared it, so that it would be available to us through network places. And then double click on this, and then here's our proplus.msi file. I'm going to click on the open button, and here are our choices: publish, assign, or advance. What the advance will do is let me fine tune the deployment even further. We're going to do this in a different video. For this, for the purposes of this video, let's pick up assign and then click on the OK button. This should take a few minutes, and then eventually you'll see a link over here saying that Office XP has been successfully assigned to users under this GPU. At this point, here we go, it's done. Okay, so you've successfully assigned Office XP in this GPU called Office XP. So let's see what we have accomplished so far. I'm going to close this. We created, let's go back to our group policy management object. We created a new policy called Office XP, and in this policy, we gave it instructions to assign Office XP to users. Now, we have not yet mentioned where will this GPU be used. Remember, the next step is to link the GPU to the appropriate object. You can link it either to the site, to the domain, or to one of these OUs. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to link the Office XP GPU to the OU called California. So I'm going to click on CA, and as you can see, CA does not have any objects, any GPUs linked to it yet. Right click on CA and say link an existing GPU, and then select the Office XP GPU and then click on the OK button. We have successfully linked the Office XP GPU to the California OU. At this point, I can close this, and we are ready to deploy the application. Now, what happens is the following. The group policy object that you just created may take a few minutes to actually get deployed within the domain. So in order to rush up this process, what you can do is the following. You can go to start, run, and then over here type gp update to refresh this policy immediately. So I'm going to click on the OK button. in a few minutes now, the GPO will be available to us. I'm going to minimize this, and let's go back to our document to see what we have done so far. We've created the SDP, we've created the OU and the users, and now we successfully created the GPO and linked it to the California OU. The last step is to actually deploy a Microsoft Office XP on a client machine. And we do have a client machine, namely client 1, ready to do that. So let's do the following. Going back over here, let me just show you what's going to happen. I'm going to go back to, I'm on DC1, and I'm going to go back to show you the organizational unit structure and the users. What we have done is the following. We have assigned Office XP to the California OU. By default, this GPO will be deployed over here, and by default, all the users contained within CA and within the sub-OUs of the CA will get that application. So for our purposes, what we're going to do is we're going to log in as Jill Smith and see if Jill Smith gets the application Office XP. So let's do that. I'm going to close these boxes over here and then take you, I'm going to minimize DC1, minimize the screen over here, and take you to client 1. So I'm going to simply log into client 1. And then we are logged in to client 1 as the administrator. And let's observe the following. Here's a colored screen. And here's a new background that gets set up. Okay, now if I go to client 1, it should be coming up in a moment. There we go. And go to all programs. There we go. You do not have Microsoft Office XP installed at this point. So we're going to do just that. I'm going to close this connection and then take you back over here. For the purposes of this lab, we need to modify the properties of the client 1 remote desktop connection. So I'm going to right click on this, click on edit, and this is what I need to do. I would like to remove the username administrator and the password from here so that I can log in as a different user to this computer. I'm going to simply click on Save As and then replace that. I'm showing you this so that in case you're performing the lab exactly the way I am, you need to make sure that you are able to log in as a user in that particular domain. Also, in order to do that, you must have the right to log on locally, which you can get by going to the default domain policy and then doing it from there, or rather the default domain controllers policy. I'm sorry about that. Once again, you need to go to the default domain controllers policy and give the right log on locally to the user that you would like to log on with. And the next thing you need to do is go to the client 1 computer as well, and then make sure that this user, in our case J. Smith, can log in remotely. So you need to do all that before you actually perform this activity if you're following the lab in this manner. If you're actually going to each computer and then doing this, you don't have to do any of these steps. Let us now log in as J. Smith. So I'm going to double click on client 1. Username J. Smith. I'm going to enter the password over here. And then I'm in. Look at the settings over here that comes up, loading your personal settings. Soon it should inform us about application deployment. This should take a few moments, but I'm going to keep the screen on because it is a significant screen and you should see exactly what's going on. Here we go, applying software installation settings. At this point, the GPO is being applied to the user account of J. Smith under benandbrady.com domain, and finally the application should be available to you. Let's give it a moment until it shows up. Also, please remember that the application is not installed completely at this point. What happens is it is installing the necessary software and the links so that when the user J. Smith first clicks on the link for any Office application such as Microsoft Word, the application is installed on the fly. So the screen is building up. I'm going to close this and let's check it out. I'm going to go to Start, click on All Programs, close this, Start, All Programs, and observe what happened. Here we go. Our applications are waiting over here for us to use. Now, remember, we use the method assign application to the users. Because we use the assign method, the application icons showed up over here. By clicking on Microsoft Word, it will start installing Microsoft Word for me. And as soon as the installation is done, you should be able to start using Microsoft Word. The very first time you use an application in this package, it takes a little bit longer. After that, the applications go very smoothly. So I'm going to let this continue and we'll go back to our discussion over here. on group policy deployment. So here are the steps that we took. We created a software deployment point. We created the OUs and put the users in the OU. We created the group policy object and linked the object to the appropriate OU. And finally, we went to the client machine to install Office XP. That is really all you need to do to deploy application. Now going back to the summary screen, here's what we did. If you have difficulty doing some of these, make sure you go through the checklist and then make sure the settings are set correctly. The first one, and this is the most common error that happens, especially if you do not have a DHCP server in your network, make sure that the DNS is listed correctly in the TCP/IP properties of the client. A lot of users will, or a lot of administrators for that matter, will simply put in the right IP address and the right subnet mask, maybe even the router, but neglect to put the right DNS server. Please remember that the DNS server is the Active Directory Service Locator service. You will not get the application if you do not have this listed properly. Make sure that the user account that you're logging on actually belongs to the right OU or the child OU that is linked within it. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's go back to DC1. I'm going to log back in as the administrator. Since we deployed Office XP to the OU, here, let me go back to Active Directory users and computers. Since the GPO was applied to the California OU, all the users within the California OU and the sub-OUs contained within it will get that application. In other words, if I were to log on as a user in the North Carolina OU, so if I were to go over here and then log on as Bob Hayes, I will not be able to actually get the application. So make sure that you're logging in as the appropriate user. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll be shooting in the dark. Your GPOs are working properly. It's just that the GPOs have been linked to the wrong OU, and hence the users in that OU cannot get the application. To fix this problem, either reassign that group policy object to the new OU where the users are located. And last but not the least, make sure to refresh your policy by simply going to start run and then typing GP update. And last but not the least, shut down and restart the client computer if everything else fails. Sometimes a lot of settings are re-established by doing that. This should conclude our video. To summarize, in this video, I showed you how to install and use the group policy management tool. I showed you how to create the organizational units and then create users within that. And then finally, we created the GPOs and linked the GPOs and actually performed a production lab where you successfully installed Office XP GPO to an OU, to a user in the California OU. I thank you very much for watching this video and hope to see you in another video in Active Directory.